Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Elizabeth Paglione. I'm a freshman studying economics at the college, and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the Park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag JFK Jr. Forum Live, which is also listed in your program. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming the co-chairs of the IOP's Fellows and Study Groups program, E.J. Devon and Kate Krolicky.
Good evening. Come on, you guys. Good evening. Welcome to this year's IOP Super Tuesday, beginning with the Fellows Forum, followed by the IOP Open House, and concluding with the State of the Union Watch Party. My name is Elijah Devon.
And I'm Kate Krolicky. We are the co-chairs of the Fellows and Study Groups program here at the Institute of Politics, what we like to call FSG. Every semester, we welcome multiple fellows from all different spectrums to join us for the semester. We have 6 residential fellows that stay with us here on campus that host weekly study groups and participate in other student events. We also are welcoming 2 very exciting visiting fellows with us this semester and tonight. We get 6 student liaisons per each team for the fellows, and they help them adjust to campus life and help them put on their study groups and events outside of their study groups.
Now, FSG is a program that you do not want to pass up on. But now that we've told you a little bit about our program, we want to tell you a little bit about us.
I'm a white and Native American girl from Lake Tahoe, Nevada.
And I'm a black boy from Compton, California.
I am a genuine Republican.
I am, per the blue, a true Democrat.
I'm an Air Force ROTC cadet.
And I love theater and musicals, particularly Hamilton. As you can see from the aforementioned characteristics, Kate and I are undoubtedly different, yet we are sincerely united. When I think about Kate and I's union, I can't help but to recall Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition or George W. Bush's more hopeful America. We, Kate and I together, are a manifestation of the multiplicity that lies at the core of our nation. And so we, in this vein, wanted to curate a fellows class that was emblematic of this multiplicity. Soon you will see world-renowned leaders of different races, different ethnicities, different sexualities, different genders, different expertise, and of course, of different political proclivity. And they've all come here to Harvard, united as one to inspire the students, the leaders of tomorrow. This amalgamation, this wealth of diversity, we think is a beautiful thing. President Kennedy would be proud.
So again, I'm Kate.
And I'm EJ.
We are different.
But we have committed to leading as one.
So for this upcoming year, we are requiring you to call us KJ.
That's KJ. That's Kajayy. Right.
Yeah.
We want to say thank you to the executive director of the IOP, Amy Howe. And we also want to give a warm thank you to the woman that keeps this program running, Abby James. You are cherished in more ways than one. And now we are really excited and we're ready to introduce you to our fellows, but first, we have to introduce you to our fearless leader. Now, he was appointed by Bill Clinton as the 14th director of the Peace Corps. He became the longest-serving president of Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And he's now leading the Institute of Politics in its mission to engage young people in politics and public service. Please welcome IOP director and tonight's moderator, the man, the myth, the legend, the Honorable Mark Gearan.
There you go. Well done. Thank you. Well done.
He served as the director of the National Economic Council for President Trump and is the former president and chief operating officer of Goldman Sachs. As a visiting fellow this semester, he will be co-leading a study group entitled The Real State of the Union. Please welcome the Honorable Gary Cohn.
She served 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives and 3 terms in the Virginia House of Delegates. She is a lawyer, mom, and small businesswoman with over 30 years in senior roles in presidential campaigns, in Congress, on congressional committees, at the Justice Department, and in private practice. She will be leading a study group on how to create a career in politics. Please welcome Congresswoman Barbara Comstock.
Born in Miami, Florida in 1980 to political refugees who fled tyranny and oppression in Cuba, he served as a member of the United States Congress representing Florida's 26th Congressional District from 2015 to 2019. He will be leading a study group on the art of the impossible. Please welcome Congressman Carlos Curbelo.
He was elected to the Tallahassee City Commission at age 23, making him the youngest person elected in the city's history. He is the former mayor of Tallahassee, Florida, and 2018 Florida Democratic gubernatorial nominee. He will be leading a study group on what democracy truly looks like. Please welcome Mayor Andrew Gillum.
Very quiet.
She served as a United States Senator from North Dakota from 2013 to 2019. In fact, she was the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from North Dakota. She will be co-leading a study group entitled The Real State of the Union with the Honorable Gary Cohn. Please welcome Senator Heidi Heitkamp.
Heidi.
She was the first African-American woman to lead a national LGBTQ organization as president and CEO of the LGBTQ Victory Fund. She, too, previously served as executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus, PAC. She'll be leading a study group entitled The New American Majority. Please welcome Ms. Aisha Moodie-Mills.
She served as U.S. Ambassador for Global Women's Issues at the Department of State during the Obama administration. Her study group will examine why women and girls matter to U.S. foreign policy. Please welcome the Honorable Ambassador Catherine Russell.
All right.
Now, he has held various senior Justice Department positions, including special counsel to Robert Mueller, and served as an independent counsel and as counsel to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He, too, is a CNN legal analyst. His study group, Independent Counsels and Presidential Investigations, will focus on special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Please welcome Mr. Michael Zeldin. To all of our fellows, welcome to Harvard.
All right.
Thank you.
Well done. That's awesome. Well, EJ, Kate, KJ, thank you very much. Thanks for your leadership in the committee, and welcome, everyone. We have a great group of fellows. We have a great group of students and faculty, staff colleagues, our neighbors here in the community. So we warmly welcome you here. It's a big night for the IOP between our open house and State of the Union, so we're excited to unpack some of the issues here. And let me, in a special way, begin by thanking both Carlos and Andrew for the weather you brought.
Yes.
Enjoy it. You know, we appreciate
While it
that.
lasts.
Yeah. When we were putting this class of fellows together, I called the mayor and I said, you know, another one of the fellows you may know, he's another Floridian, Carlos Curbelo. And you said?
We've known each other since we were 16. Carlos used to attend a school, graduated from a high school in Miami called Berlin Jesuit. And I was 6-7 hours north in Gainesville, Florida. And coincidentally, we were both, he was elected the president of Student Government Associations for all of the state of Florida. And the year that he was elected, selected me to serve as the parliamentarian, the rule keeper, during his administration.
So even though he's the big shot now, back then,
and I was a Democrat then, and I got it right. He went the Republican route and got it wrong, but we're still friends.
well, and when he got nominated by the Democratic Party, we exchanged some very nice texts, and I was very proud of him and proud to be here with you now. So thank you.
I told him I would be happy to either insult him or tweet nice things at him, whichever would be most helpful.
Whatever, we're glad you're both here. It's all good for the IOP, so that's all that matters. Well, thank you all. I think all of campus is excited. So at the outset, we thank you for taking the time and the effort They all live in apartments here, IOP housing, so you'll see them around campus. And particularly grateful to Senator Heitkamp and Gary for coming every week to lead these study groups. So a lot to unpack here. But let me begin with tonight, the State of the Union. The President will be giving his address at 9 o'clock. We'll be showing it here. The White House tells us the theme is choosing American greatness. And Gary, perhaps we should start with you. You were in the limousine driving to the Capitol from the White House in a former joint session with the President. You've helped craft those remarks. So perhaps you could give us a sense of...
Both of them. Joint session and the last State of the Union. I was in the limousine with him on the way to the Capitol.
Okay. So we got the setting right.
We were changing words in both of them, maybe even changing paragraphs or pages.
Oh. President I worked for did the same thing.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
But let's get to the State of the Union.
It's amazing how they don't like words at 7:30 in the evening.
Yeah. Tell us what we should expect tonight. What do you anticipate the President to be saying?
So, look, I think the President's going to say a bunch of things. I mean, the one thing about President Trump is he will not spend an enormous amount of time dwelling on any singular topic. He will come out and talk about the strength of the U.S. economy. He'll talk about the jobs that have been created. He'll talk about GDP growth. He'll talk about wage growth. And those are all real things going on in the U.S. economy. I think he will then shift to trying to reach out in a bipartisan way and talk about things that could be done in a bipartisan way. And I think the one potential there is something on infrastructure. So I would assume that he'll talk about an infrastructure bill. It's something that Democrats support. It's something that the President supports. He has a lot of desire to do something on the crumbling infrastructure in the United States. So I think he'll talk about that. Then I think he will probably wander into some areas that are very passionate for him that will be less bipartisan, more partisan. I think he will start talking about what it takes or what it means to make America great. And he will get into some certain areas where you will start seeing a very divided Congress on immigration and some of the other areas, path to citizenship, DACA, some of the other areas that will be more controversial. And I think those will be his big talking points tonight.
Mayor Gillum, you've crossed the state recently and had a real perspective in Florida, what people are thinking about, what people are feeling in your home state. What do you look for tonight in the President's State of the Union, and how would you assess it? Your good friend Stacey Abrams is going to be giving the Democratic response, but how do you see it, and what do you anticipate tonight?
Well, I will tell you, I'm actually eagerly anticipating Stacey Abrams' remarks this evening. Those are the ones I'm actually sort of clued most into. I think she represents something pretty amazing about the state of politics and maybe the future of where we're going to go. I have to take Gary's words, given his experience with helping this president prepare for the State of the Union, and I sort of agree. I think he, I don't know how disciplined, even though it's very disappointing in the aftermath of the president's speeches, how the media goes crazy if he sticks to the teleprompter, which I think is a really low bar for, for how you interpret a president. And I do mean to be serious about this, that the State of the Union is a real moment where a president can be very lofty, where a president can set really high hopes and collective goals and ambitions for a nation as big and vast and powerful as the United States of America. And I fear that tonight will probably be a little bit of demagoguing of immigrants. I think he will talk a lot about invasion of the United States on the southern border, in spite of the fact that illegal crossing at the border is at a 20-year low. And we may hear, I don't know, El Chapo, a name dropped or name checked. And I think that it probably will give great energy to his base, and I think it will largely divide the rest of the country. But there will be moments in there where we can have some collective and shared enthusiasm. Criminal justice reform might be one of them. So I'm excited about that, and I agree with Gary as a municipal elected. If he makes a serious effort at infrastructure, I think that's another place where you could bind together Democrats, Republican, local elected officials, state officials, and national officials. So not a lot of high hopes, but am looking forward to Stacey Abrams.
Yes.
Senator Heitkamp, let me ask you, we come off this government shutdown, 35 days, and you've sat in the chamber at previous State of the Union addresses, but when you look at the shutdown and we're nearing another deadline, what can be done? I mean, you've sat in the Senate, you know your colleagues well. What do you look at for this kind of crisis of the shutdown and the dysfunction that we're seeing?
Well, the main thing that you do as a United States Senator is figure out how the heck you're going to get out of there as fast as you can when it's over. Because it is so busy. So Barbara Mikulski, who is all of about 4'9", said, "Stick with me, Heidi." And so she bulldozed our way through, and she said, "You sit here next to the diplomats, and when it's over, you tell them to get off their seats so you walk across their seat and get out that door." And so, I think you guys saw during the discussion, when the speech was canceled, everybody's saying, "Oh, thank goodness, we don't have to sit through that, and it's really boring." And now it's again a great performance. My take on this is that the president is going to use this as his 2020 announcement speech. I don't think it's going to be as bipartisan as what Gary thinks. I think it's going to be very...
Wait, Heidi, I said a little section would be bipartisan. The little section on infrastructure.
I think it is going to be more kind of figurative finger wagging at the Democratic Party. It's going to be calling out great distinctions in public policy between the two parties. It's going to be laying down his narrative and his case for why he should get a second term. And so it is going to be, and the media is all going to sit and watch it, and they're going to have this split screen of Nancy's face or Chuck's face. You know what that looks like, and it's going to, at the end of the day, it's going to be nothing in terms of public policy. And Gary and I disagree on this. I think that the tax bill took away the ability to do as robust of an infrastructure package as what you can. They will propose a fairly anemic package. That won't pass because everybody now is terrified of what's happening with debt and deficit. And so we're going to see a much more political speech than what I think has been described here. But at the end of the day, you've got to govern. And that's one of the challenges. Now, he walked back. I think there was an expectation that he was going to announce a national emergency on immigration and on migration at the border. I think he'll walk that back because he doesn't know what the Republican reaction will be in that room. And so he can't say something like that without his side standing up to great applause. But I think at the end of the day, what's likely, and this is just speculation, is that he will get enough distance from this speech, get close to it. He won't get what he wants out of the negotiation, and he'll declare an emergency and declare victory, and we'll move on. And so it's yet again another great example of the dysfunction that's in Washington, D.C., that we can't kind of uniformly sit and anticipate anything other than politics at a State of the Union. It's why Gary and I have kind of fashioned our seminars here as the real State of the Union, talking about things, real problems that need to be solved, like debt and deficit, healthcare, immigration, the workforce challenges. And so, we would love, I think all of us up here, to see a real State of the Union speech that actually talks about what's happening in our country instead of a political speech that advances a partisan political agenda. You won't hear that tonight.
Congressman Comstock, you have probably represented more federal government employees than than many members of the Congress within the Beltway. And as you've observed the shutdown for 35 days, what do you see as a pathway towards any resolution here? Reflecting on the senator's comments and as you think about your former colleagues and Republican colleagues.
Yeah, well, since I represented a district in Virginia, which is actually right by the CIA and then stretches out to the West Virginia border, has one of the largest, still has one of the largest numbers of federal employees. So I've always thought government shutdowns were a bad idea. About a year ago, right now, I was at the White House at a round table on a whole other topic, and the president started talking about it. It was just after we had the named Schumer shutdown by the president, and so I thought it was a good time to tell him, hey, that Schumer shutdown didn't turn out well, but it's never turned out well when Republicans did it either. They're costly, they're not conservative. It's estimated it would cost about $6 to $11 billion to shut down the government. So I don't think you'll see the appetite for Republicans, or obviously Democrats don't have that appetite, but I don't think you're going to see the appetite for Republicans to continue that. I think the people who were telling the president that, probably their stock has gone down because it did not go well at all. So I do think you're going to see a little bit of bipartisanship. You look at some of the guests. The guests, a couple of the guests that he's featuring are people that with criminal justice reform. I think it was Alice Mary Johnson. And the stories there are really heartbreaking on the criminal justice reform. And those are things that don't get the headlines all the time, although I got a little bit of it. But the legislation passed in December, and people really were working on this for quite some time. I know I had one of my most generous donors who never asked for anything except please do criminal justice reform. I said, do you have any tie to it? He goes, no, it's just the right thing to do. And I mean, he had businesses, he had large companies, and he just said, this is the right thing to do. And you really had a sea change in people coming together and doing that. And the president did see that, for better or worse, whether you like him or not, that was a good bill. Prescription drug prices, I think he's going to talk about tonight. He's had some odd couplings there with some Democrats where he agrees on doing that. And I do think infrastructure, I was on the Transportation Committee. It was frustrating that didn't get done because those are always bipartisan bills. And I think you will be able to get something done of some considerable size because you have Elaine Chao, who is the Secretary of Transportation. She has a pretty good ally over in the Senate with Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and has a lot of respect. And I have to say, it's one of the best run departments that I saw during over the past 2 years. So I do think you're going to have some opportunities there. I do agree there'll be other things that will be a little bit more contentious. On the immigration issue, which my colleague here, Carlos Curbelo, was a great leader in finding a compromise. I've always thought there was a pretty logical compromise there. We voted on one, and Carlos can tell you how many votes we got and the elements of that, but he was a great leader on that front. And unfortunately, in that area, you continue to have people on the extremes who want to have a campaign issue instead of come together and have a solution. And I do think the outlines of the bill that Carlos had did have that compromise. May still be challenging to get that done, but I still hope we can.
Congressman, let me engage you here and pivot perhaps to 2020, which is admittedly 19 months away, but drawing from the lessons of the election of 2018 as you look nationally in some of the conversation we have here, what are some of those lessons that each party takes out of the most recent election, midterm, as we look to 2020 with all the attendant issues?
So I think that in 2016, so many Americans were so frustrated with our government that essentially it decided to conduct an experiment, right? And elect someone who obviously didn't have any experience in politics and obviously was very unique in a number of different ways. I think, and I'm not making a comparison, but the electorate was in somewhat of a similar mood in 2008, where there was a great level of frustration, and they decided to elect an unknown quantity, very different in nature, but an unknown quantity. We had a similar, I think, dynamic in 2016 with obviously an extremely different candidate. And I think the message in 2018 is that the American people are kind of growing tired of the experiment. that the purpose of the experiment was to get the government to actually work, to kind of move past this hyper-partisan age that we've been living for the last 20 plus years. And in fact, it's only gotten worse, right? When the government remains closed for 35 days because there isn't an agreement on border security and immigration relief, something Barbara alluded to, and by the way, something we'll be diving deep into in my study group, because I think immigration is the most important issue in this country right now. Not just because the system is flawed and needs to be reformed. That's obvious. We've known that for at least 13 years when George W. Bush kind of began this movement, the modern-day immigration reform movement, but more importantly because it's the issue that is most dividing the country. It's an issue that leads to scapegoating, to Americans diminishing each other, to Americans just really blaming each other for dynamics in the economy that really aren't necessarily related to immigration. So if this country is going to begin healing, if we're going to go back to a rational politics, we have to solve the immigration puzzle, which is why I dedicated at least 6 weeks of my life back in the spring of last year to trying to build a compromise. And this is how immigration works in Congress, so you can see how unique Congress is. So you take two issues that are fairly popular in the United States. Increased border security, don't call it a wall because that's divisive, but most Americans can be convinced that we can do better at the border. There's a lot of drug trafficking at the border, there's human trafficking, not at the levels we used to see 10, 15 years ago, but it's there, and we should all be against that. So any more resources we can dedicate to fighting that is generally good. And then you take the dreamer population, right? Say 2 million young immigrants brought to the country as children, educated here, paying taxes here, contributing. Let's just embrace them and accept them as Americans. It's another 70, 80% issue. You put those together in the Congress and you get about 25% of the votes in the House. That's what Patrick McHenry calls the mystery math of immigration policy in Congress. And that's how broken the institution is, where neither side wants to give anything at all. Because as Barbara said, these issues are very popular come election time. Because they're used to pit Americans against one another, the divide and conquer strategy. So I think the lesson from 2018 is the American people are getting tired of this experiment. It hasn't bared the fruit that I think people wanted. And the only way for those that are in the political process today to change that, to improve that, is to get real results on issues like infrastructure, like immigration. So that's what I'm looking for tonight. Is the president serious about compromising on these two issues, or is he just raising them to continue exploiting them politically? And by the way, same goes for Democrats and Ms. Abrams in her response, and of course in whatever the extended response is by Ms. Pelosi and Mr. Schumer tomorrow. Do they want deals, or do they want to keep making a political profit? That's what I'm looking for.
So Aisha, let me get you on this as a Democratic strategist and having someone who has thought about and written and leading a study group on the new American majority, as you say. As you look at the lessons from 2018 and thinking through 2020, where do you see us as an electorate? And what are the threads going into the 2020 primary and beyond?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing that I'll say is that I think that 2018 showed us that Americans are tired of all this deal making and this deal doing that has absolutely nothing to do with them. Politics has been so much about Donald Trump in the last couple of years that it actually hasn't been about the people. And so in 2018, the people said, we're going to take that back. So we saw more women run for office and win than ever before in history. We also saw more people of exactly, right? We saw more people of color run for office and win than ever before in history. We saw more LGBTQ people run for office and win than ever in history. And there was this real energy that said, representation matters. I don't hear myself, see myself reflected in our representation, and so the people need to take that back. It was under the resist mantra that happened, but it also was with the backdrop of this demographic shift that we're seeing in our country. Right now, we're having what's considered the browning of America. So people of color's numbers are growing. Ultimately, they're going to be the majority of the population in this country. And so that means that our politics, our political power, are also ultimately going to shift. How are we preparing for that? How are we seeing that play out right now? What does that mean? I think that going into 2020, here's what we're about to see. We've been talking so much about Donald Trump, resisting Donald Trump, change the Congress, Donald Trump, right? Now the Democrats are going to have to figure out how to actually talk to their constituents, to their base, which are significantly people of color that matter to the election of Democrats, but certainly to Democrat taking back the White House. And in this primary that's about to play out, which is going to be the most amazing, fantastical, long 19 months of our lives that we're experiencing, but you're going to see conversations now still include, I can beat Donald Trump. But these candidates on the Democratic side are actually going to have to talk to the people. They're going to have to go into communities and win Latinx voters. They're going to have to shift hearts and minds and get African Americans to support them. And they're only going to be able to do that by talking about issues and how they impact people's lived experience, as opposed to the hyperbole and the rhetoric and the deal making that hasn't had a whole lot to do with them on a day-to-day basis. And so what we're witnessing right now is that the map is shifting. The pathway to victory is shifting, and we're literally kind of living history, and it's easy to gloss over this, but I'm kind of geeked out about it because I like the data and the numbers and the map. Watching this Democratic primary, it's going directly through communities of color. Early states, you've got Nevada, like 30% Latinx population. You got South Carolina, African American, significant voting bloc. Come Super Tuesday in March, you have California going early now. And then you have Georgia, you have North Carolina, you have Virginia. You have these states that in order for the Democrat to actually get through that primary, they're going to have conversations that are about communities of color in a real way. And that is something that I'm looking forward to because so much of the air in the room has been about Donald Trump and about Donald Trump. And so now so many of these candidates are going to have a reckoning with what exactly they're going to do to enhance people's lives in a real way. And I think that that's the heart of it and the meat of it. And through that primary, we're also going to be reminded of how Donald Trump lacks substance, frankly. Like we just had a conversation about, he's probably going to have, a campaign spiel tonight, not really talk about substantive issues. So I'm looking forward to us actually talking about issues again, seeing that play out. But last thing I'll say is that I personally believe that the Democratic candidate that comes out of that primary has to be as exciting as an Andrew Gillum or a Stacey Abrams.
I didn't win.
It's all good. It's all good. But here's the thing. They both outperformed any other Democrat that ran statewide in the South, right? In like recent history. You guys did well. You guys did really, really, really well. And you did well in the sense of galvanizing the enthusiasm of the base of the party. And I think that that these Democrats are going to have to, whoever comes out, is going to have to actually rile up the base, excite and animate people, connect with the diversity of the party in order to make sure that there's the turnout to even compete with regards to Donald Trump, and not just making Donald Trump the center of that, making the people the center of the politics.
Thank you. So Ambassador Russell, let me bring us to public service and the importance of the Kennedy School, the Institute of Politics, over the arc of your career, from Capitol Hill to the White House to a global ambassador. Public service has been an impressive thread through your life of consequence. What drew you? You had many options. What drew you to your journey of public service and the ways you've served?
It's interesting. When I was younger, maybe about your age, most of you, I was super shy, really reserved person. And I had a friend who was working on the Walter Mondale campaign. Most of you probably, I know you weren't alive then, but I'm not sure you even remember who he is. But anyway, he was running for president in 1984. And my friend kept saying, come to Iowa and work in this campaign. And I was like, I'm not the kind of person who can do that. I'm so shy. I would never want to have to do that. So anyway, after months, he persuaded me to go to Oklahoma, of all places, and try to help a Democrat get elected, right? Which was not easy because Oklahoma was not a place where anybody had ever organized for a Democratic candidate. It was just not something that people there were that excited about, unlike Iowa where they're kind of used to it. So, we would call and say, hi, I'm calling from the Walter Mondale campaign, and they would say, I wouldn't vote for him for dog catcher, and hang up in your ear. And so. But I had this experience where I was working on behalf of something and someone that I believed in, and that it was so much bigger than who I was, right? So the fact that I was like a really shy person and I didn't see myself that way, that just kind of disappeared because I cared so much about what I was doing, and I loved that feeling. I loved feeling like I was part of something bigger than myself. And that's really, my whole career has been in the government. I worked, when I went to law school and then I came out and I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee, worked on things like, the Supreme Court nominations, which were crazy. I worked at the Justice Department in a really high-level position, and then I worked at the White House and then the State Department. And I say that not to, just to say that it's been a tremendous honor for me, honestly. And the place where I felt that the most was the State Department, because then I traveled around the world and I would go in as the representative of the United States, which was an amazing feeling, right? I was so proud to do that because the United States was such a leader on women's issues. So I think the lesson from my career is a couple things. One, that public service is a tremendous honor. And I think now, when you look at the politics, it's disturbing. And I worry about young people who just see what's happening now as what politics is, because this is an unusual time. And I have the advantage of being old enough to having seen a lot of things over my career. This is not normal. And so I would say to you, to just embrace the opportunity. If you can find the chance to do public service in your career, you should do it. You should do it any way that you can, whether it's local government, federal government. Find the opportunity to serve your country and serve the people in your communities, because it will mean something that's so much bigger than yourself, and that's a tremendous honor. You guys are prepared for it. You have the Kennedy School here, you have the IOP, you can hear from practitioners, you can understand what it's like. And I just hope you will go out and embrace the opportunity and think about ways that you can try to make the world a better place.
That's awesome. Michael, similarly, you've had a career dedicated to public purpose. We see you on CNN all the time.
Sorry.
Yeah. All that's happening with all these investigations, so I only wonder what keeps you up at night when you really wonder about this. But so you too have led this life committed to the public good. And as an attorney, how do you reflect on this? If I could bring you into a similar conversation of public service, what that has meant through the thread of your career.
Well, similarly, a sense of doing good mattered to me a lot. And my career as a lawyer has been sort of very checkered in a sense. I was a legal aid lawyer. I was a federal public defender. I was a federal prosecutor. I was a congressional investigator. I was an independent counsel. And what I did was found things about which I felt some level of passion, but most predominantly what drove my decision making is, could I make a difference and would it be enjoyable? I always made choices on, would I like this? Would it be fun? Would I contribute? For it's not worth it if it's not enjoyable. And I spent 13 years at a consulting firm, which was lovely also. And it wasn't public service, but it was something I felt I could do and make a contribution with respect to. So I think that as I look over this bright-eyed group of students, that my hope for them would be to find something about which they feel some level of passion, about which they think they will find enjoyment, and to plunge into it, knowing that as our careers reflect, change is possible throughout. You're not making a choice on day one that will be forever. It'll be until it stops being interesting to you, and then you'll change again. And I think that matters. And I hope that people behave in a way that's consistent with, sort of their dreams for themselves.
Well said. Well, we want to get to your questions. There are microphones here and in the balconies. The rule here is, of course, is well known, to identify yourself, to have a brief question, and of course, questions end with a question mark. It's a time-honored tradition. You're looking at our colleagues here as fellows. They will lead 7 study groups. So you can learn more about that on our website, but across the spectrum of issues. So why don't we start right here?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Luke Albert. I'm a freshman at the college. I had a question for Mayor Gillum and Senator Heitkamp about both already announced presidential candidate Kamala Harris having a pre-rebuttal to the State of the Union address, and Bernie Sanders, who's potentially looking like he could announce for candidacy for the President of the United States, having a rebuttal after Stacey Abrams' response. And I just wondered what you two thought of that, them both independently making those decisions outside of the party apparatus when Stacey Abrams was already selected to give an official response to the State of the Union.
Really good question.
Well,
That's a really
Andrew
good question.
doesn't know this, but I know Stacey very well. I've known Stacey for probably 15, 20 years, which, you know, is a long time. She's a Truman Scholar. She's really committed to that program. I think it's dangerous for them to go up against Stacey. I think that's a real risk. Because when you know her and you know her eloquence, I mean, she really is Barbara Jordan of her generation. She has a booming voice and an incredible presence. And I think there is a way, and I'm not criticizing Kamala and I'm not criticizing Bernie. They're good friends of mine. But this is a stage to say something about the Democratic Party, which is what Stacey's going to do tonight. And I think she's going to be eloquent. I think she's going to be on target, and I think she's going to give the best speech of the night. And like I said, it is always dangerous for someone who's not that caliber, which I don't think either one of those people can give a speech like Stacey, to go up against her. And so there's risk in what they're doing.
Andrew?
Right.
Well, I'll align myself with the big fan of Stacey, part of the response. I just had dinner with Stacey in Atlanta about a week or so ago, and it was the first time that she and I had the opportunity to see each other beyond our elections. And it was a time to just sort of breathe and commiserate, frankly, a little bit together, but also to celebrate. In both our races, we saw historic turnout. We, in my state, reached near presidential level turnout in a midterm election. Young people increasing their vote by 50% in the state of Florida. Voters of color, black voters specifically, in our state outperforming themselves over Obama in 2008 and in 12. So there was tremendous energy, and I thought her selection was a really, really important moment for a new generation of leaders to sort of rise up and say, this is our worldview and our theory of change and what we think we ought to be talking about as a country. That being said, Senator Sanders and Senator Harris, I think also represent the fact that the Democratic Party is no monolith. And I think you may even hear a divergence of thinking and what they might express in their own comments as well. I'm going to be clued into Stacey's remarks, and I missed Senator Harris's pre-buttal. And I'm not sure that I'll get to see Senator Sanders' post, but the fact that we are going to have maybe 24 people running for president on the Democratic side is probably the best evidence we could offer to the fact that the party is not a monolith, and we really are struggling with what is going to be the vision that breaks through. And I'm actually really excited about seeing that happen. I'm a fan of primaries. I was in one myself. I raised $6 million to my combined opponents, more than $90 million. And with the least amount of money, we were able to make it through that process. And so I think they're healthy. They're healthy through democracy. And I think whoever prevails in there likely will be the next president of the United States.
Thank
Great.
you.
Let's go right up there.
Hi, my name is Meena Venkataraman, and I'm a sophomore at the college. And this question is really for anyone who wants to answer, but particularly Congresswoman Comstock and Mayor Gillum. So given the swift condemnation of Governor Ralph Northam, as well as the condemnation from Republicans of Congressman Steve King, the Washington Post has described this moment as a sort of Me Too moment on race. To what extent do you agree with that characterization, specifically the part about both parties coming to the point where they're swiftly condemning racism?
Sure. Well, I hadn't seen the Washington Post editorial, but I agree. I know Carlos and I have been certainly not happy with people like Steve King in our party. I was happy to see him stripped of his committee position, so he really doesn't have a role. I expect, and I will support, a primary opponent to him if he does. It looks like he's going to stick it out. But not in Virginia. So I do think you're going to see a primary challenge to Steve King, and I do expect that he will not be the Republican nominee in 2020. As to Ralph Northam, I think that has been just so incredibly botched, and it's just tragic. And I think pretty much everybody has called for him to step aside because he just doesn't have that credibility. I think the challenge you now have, it's really sort of, it's the Democrats' problem the way Steve King is our problem. And our leadership stripped him of, we had all admonished him over the years of his statements. Our leadership now stripped him of having any ability really to do anything. I don't know I used to serve in the State House. I think the impeachment route, there isn't really quite a method there for this, but they're going to have to try a number of things on how are they going to get him to move aside. And now you have sort of, I guess, fratricide there. They're all kind of going after each other too, with Lieutenant Governor and maybe even the Attorney General. Both the Lieutenant Governor and the Attorney General have wanted to run for governor, so now that if Ralph Northam steps aside and one gets a jump on this, you see a lot of mess there. But I think you need to go back to the issues and the concern, and I think that's the kind of thing when the public responds the way they are, you really get to lead on that. And you go out, there's been protests in both cases, and that ends up having the impact, and I think you will see the people leading what ultimately they have to do.
Let me add something briefly to that, because what happened a few weeks ago in the Steve King situation was actually historic, and I think for most of us it was a kind of a natural reaction, and what any of us would do to anyone who's associated with us who would say things like that. But for years I watched, and you watched, a lot of Republican leaders look the other way when Steve King said certain things, or lament privately, oh gosh, why does he say that? That's horrible. Never were they willing to confront him in this way. So for the Republican Party, it was a very important step. It was something that I was happy to see. We only have two parties in this country. Neither should tolerate hateful speech or any kind of bigotry or discrimination. So kudos to Kevin McCarthy for doing what past Republican leaders were always reticent to do, which is to directly confront Mr. King and to make him face consequences for his words in this case.
Yeah, and we had some, on the Me Too issue, when that happened, some members resigned and stepped aside. Others decided they weren't going to leave, and they just stayed there, and it was painful on both sides. They more often left than not, but then you had some that stayed there. So again, it's their constituencies demanding they go, be shown the door, and then whatever steps we can take in leadership. In the case of Me Too, they started ethics investigations, and that ended up kind of running them out of town to avoid the cost and difficulty of that.
I think one, kudos for the Republican leadership stepping up. It is a low bar. He should have been condemned a long time ago. His actions are not.
We did.
But I agree. Yeah. And in Northam's case, really tragic enveloping there. First of all, for him to take responsibility, say that it was him, overnight discover it wasn't him. He wasn't sure which one of him it was before he wasn't one of them at all. And now it's turned into a bit of a spectacle there in the state of Virginia. And I think what has probably happened is he's now moved beyond a place where he could reasonably govern a state that is as richly diverse as Virginia, and a state as steeped in the kind of division that we've seen in Virginia. What I think is a missed moment, and I'm not this is actually a question I think we all have to reckon with, which is, now in his case, 1984, he then admitted that he did do blackface, but it was to become Michael Jackson. In 1984, between he and Michael Jackson, he was the only one darkening his skin, at that time. But the fact that the fact that we didn't get to make a better learning and teachable moment out of that, because I have to tell you, I don't think that people should be beyond grace. I think I went around the state when I campaigned talking about pass Amendment 4 in my state, which stripped the right of people to vote who had a felony conviction, 1.4 million people. And I just simply said that people shouldn't be judged forever by their worst day. And I mean that in that case, and I also mean that in this one. But there also has to be an acknowledgement of what you did wrong, some contrition, the ability to then move forward and sort of try to heal and make it a real teachable moment. But I think there'll be more of this to come. And I think we do have to look back over the arc of people's history, 20, 30 years. How much of that do they have to carry all the way forward before we say there's redemption? And then there is a pathway to, I think, growth in education for all of us. Northam could have gone that route. He didn't. I still believe he should resign. And he can be redeemed, but he should do it from a private citizen's seat.
Yeah.
That's great.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a mid-career MPA at the Harvard Kennedy School and actually worked on the 2012 election in Florida, which makes me pretty old compared to some of the other students in the room here. My question is for all you who worked at both the state and federal level, either in elected office or otherwise. Kind of given everything going on in the federal level, could you make the argument with a straight face that students like us should consider going into jobs at Capitol Hill or in the White House when there are opportunities to go work in state capitals or in mayor's offices across the country? Just how do you think about that given the different divisions we're seeing in the country right now?
Well, Aisha, can we get you started, because you started on Capitol Hill, and then we'll get to Congressman.
So my immediate reaction is that all service actually matters. It does. It really does. I spent the bulk of my career being in the minority. As a Democrat, we were getting our asses kicked, y'all. It was bad. But it mattered because there's still relationships, inroads, things that you can actually work together on. Congresswoman Comstock actually talks about that, the bipartisanship that happens. But the last several years, I've actually been focused on electing people at the state and local level. The vast majority of LGBTQ people that I got elected were all state and local folks. And the truth is that those folks are doing work at the end of the day that is most directly touching people and impacting communities. And it is extremely meaningful. And so I would not deter anyone, despite how, I know it's crazy, guys, and the rhetoric is nuts, but if you go up to Capitol Hill and you meet with a staffer in an office right now, they'll tell you that the work that they're doing matters, despite the crazy you see on TV. And the work that's happening at the state level matters too. I am someone who believes that participation matters, service is meaningful. We go into this work because we want to impact people's lives. Do it at every level. Do it at every level.
Gearan, let me bring you into this. You've said that you served 440 days in the Trump administration.
And nights.
And nights.
And nights.
But you made a career decision to leave government and to go into federal government and public service. Could you reflect on that?
Yeah, look, I worked 35 years in the private sector. Basically graduated college and went to the private sector, worked 35 years, and was really happy doing that. And got a strange phone call one day asking me if I would come into the government. Was not looking for the phone call at all. It was not even on my radar screen. Got the phone call and got asked to go into public sector, and I said, look, we owe it to our country We owe it to our citizens to give back. And I felt like, look, I've been unbelievably lucky in my career. I've been at Goldman Sachs for 27 years. I was at sort of the pinnacle of the finance world. I'd run the firm I was entering my 11th year, which was probably long enough to do that job. And I didn't know if I'd ever get another opportunity to give back to my country. And it's been a country that was amazing to my family. I'm first generation college educated. My parents never got the opportunity to go to college. My grandparents immigrated here out of Europe to escape, bad times in Europe as traditional American family. I'm very stereotypical Jewish American family, and so the honor to serve just felt like an amazing opportunity, and I never hesitated for a second.
And you're glad you did.
It was the best decision I made in my life.
Great. Right up there.
Hi, Jay Gleason. You haven't said anything about foreign affairs tonight. Last week, the Senate passed a non-binding resolution introduced by McConnell, opposing the president's plans to withdraw from Syria and Afghanistan. Trump actually ran as the non-intervention candidate in 2016, which is the source of a lot of his support, whereas Hillary Clinton has always been a super hawk who's believed firmly in American exceptionalism. So how are candidates in both parties, especially the Democratic Party, going to position themselves on this very contentious and very dangerous and very lethal issue of American interventionism around the world? There is a split among the Democrats as well as the Republicans on this continuing dilemma.
Thank you. Well, Ambassador Russell.
Oh, my goodness.
That may have your name all over it.
Wow.
No, but let's broaden the question. You've, as you said, represented our country around, and you've seen a transition from one administration to the other. And you've also done a lot of domestic work. Senate Judiciary Committee, the Justice Department. You see the intersection of domestic issues and foreign issues. Could you reflect on the question and the impact of the election, as I understand the question?
Yeah, let me talk about it a little bit from the perspective of the area that I know the best, which is women's issues. And I think what I saw when I was in the government was that the United States was a leader on that issue. And everywhere we went around the world, people were very interested in what the United States thought, what we were doing, what we believed, and what the model was for how we did things in our country. Just as an example, I worked on the Violence Against Women Act here in the United States years ago, and then we drafted an International Violence Against Women Act. And so we went around the world and talked to countries about how they can try to address this problem of gender-based violence, which affects 1 in 3 women in the world. And they looked to us, and we said, look, we haven't solved all these problems in our country, but we have made efforts, we've got good laws and all the rest of it. So I think that the United States is a critical voice, and I do worry that that voice is missing. And obviously, the current president has a different view about the role of the United States in the world. He's already made it clear he's going to pull us out of Afghanistan, and there are many reasons to do that, but it's a complicated decision. The idea of pulling us out of Syria overnight was preposterous in my view, and now he's sort of reversed himself on that. But I think that, again, his idea of America first, which I believe in America too. I love this country, but I think that we have an obligation. We are the most fortunate country in the world, and I think that we have a role to play around the world. And I just don't agree with the way he approaches it. And having said that, these are they're difficult. They're very difficult issues.
I want to make this point. How many of you here want us out of Afghanistan? Right? How many of you want us out of Syria? Fewer. I mean, this is a president who ran as an isolationist president, whether it's trade isolation or whether it's foreign policy isolation, pulling out of NATO. He has been true to his word. He has been very disruptive, and it's at a pace that Congress is not comfortable with. Remember, Barack Obama promised to do what? Take us out of Afghanistan the first time he ran. That didn't happen. And it didn't happen for a real reason. It didn't happen because it would destabilize the entire region. And I know it's a hard, I know you don't agree with that. But my point is that public policy especially foreign policy as it relates to protection of this country, cannot be made the way this president is making it. You have to bring people along, you have to bring the military along, and yes, there has to be alternative voices. There are alternative voices in the United States Senate and in the Congress. They aren't going to stand with the president because of his methodologies on how he's going to do it. And so we have to have this discussion. The failure that we've had, and every Democratic president should be willing to stand, and I'll say this, on a podium and say, we are not going to intervene again without an authorized use of military force resolution, right? Because we have to actually have that conversation. And we do this, we've expanded we're operating now under an umbrella that is completely stretched thin. And the champion here, I would tell you, is Tim Kaine. So if you want to focus on this, Tim has been absolutely adamant that we need to have an authorized use of military force. Probably should have had it before we did anything in Syria. So these are, that because we're so dysfunctional as a Congress and playing our role, we're taking shortcuts we should never take with the Constitution and with public policy. And we need to fix that. But I mean, we have a president who said, we can pull out of Syria because we can go back because we have fast planes. Yeah, well, he said that, right? I mean, he said that in the interview. Now, does that give you some comfort that we should hand him the responsibility to make a decision about what's happening in Syria? And so that's the problem. It may be the right decision, and a lot of people have said it may be the right decision, but the process is flawed. And Congress can't just simply say no to the White House on what they're deciding without exercising their constitutional obligation to participate. And so I think you're going to hear more and more about this. Obviously, Bernie has led the effort against what's happening in Yemen. Good for Bernie. He didn't get his vote the first time. He certainly got it the second time. So you're going to see more and more discussion about foreign policy. I think that is right now at the back door. But you need to be really careful supporting a president who will do stuff as rash as what he has. He's been walked back now by Congress, but not with a solution for the future.
I think we have time probably for one more question. Why don't we go right there?
Hi, my name is Kevin. I'm originally from Miami, Florida. So 2018 was the first time that I voted, and I was very happy to see that Amendment 4 passed, but I was very disappointed, as expected, with the outcome of the election being that it was closer than 30,000 votes. I have a question for Mayor Gillum, Congressman Curbelo, and Aisha. What do you think that in 2020 the state party in Florida needs to do for a Democrat to prevail in the presidential election? What do you think you can learn from the Florida GOP, seeing that they're very organized?
Yeah. Carlos, answer that.
I defer to you.
I'll give you an answer. Put up a good candidate.
But just
like, how could you guys bounce off of each other? Like, what are the lessons that Florida Democrats can learn going forward, seeing that they're now going to do the Path to Power conference in 2020 for 2020? What do you think they can do with the Latino communities? What do you think they can do now with the 1.4 ex-convicts that now have the right to vote? And what do you think you can learn from GOP
That was bipartisan. That was a bipartisan supported
bipartisan
effort.
support in almost every state Senate district in Florida.
Yeah.
Great question.
So, number one, awesome that you're from Miami.
Actually graduated from your high
Number
school.
two, I proudly supported Amendment 4. I think I might have been the only congressional Republican in Florida that supported it, and I agree with Andrew on giving people second chances. And with regards to the Democratic Party in Florida, it really is a complicated state. So, for example, the Hispanic vote in Florida, in southwestern United States, in Illinois, in the Northeast here, the Hispanic vote is more strongly Democratic. In Florida, that's mixed, right? In South Florida, where there are a lot of Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans, Colombian Americans, there's this legacy of people who fled leftist movements in Latin America, and the way some Democrats speak really remind or conjure up some of those old memories from the past. this whole concept of socialism in Miami, you could get grounded for using that word if you're a child in a Cuban family. So it is a major challenge, and I still think, and this was interesting because the conclusion for many observers in Florida was that in 2018, with the gubernatorial candidates, we had two people who were pretty decidedly in both the conservative camp and the liberal camp. I personally believe that in Florida, centrist candidates tend to do better. Now, of course, the governor's race, we can't really test because we didn't have, in my view anyway, I don't know if Andrew considers himself a centrist, I'll let him speak for himself, but in my view, there wasn't a decided centrist candidate. So I think in Florida in 2020, the party or assuming Trump is the Republican candidate, if the Democrats want to win, they need a true centrist. I think someone like Joe Biden that can appeal more to the center and rely less on the base, because in Florida, again, the constituencies, or at least one of them that is typically Democratic in the rest of the country, really isn't that reliable.
So I had to fight this battle of left, right, center in my primary. I was certainly decidedly a progressive candidate, unapologetic about that, and the going theory was that you can't run progressive in the state of Florida. Democrats have lost the race for governor for the last 20 years. We have not won one in 24 years. I got closer to winning the race over any Democrat in the last 24 years in the state of Florida. Typically, we lose by anywhere between 6 points to 1 point, and in my race, we were down to 0.4 difference. President Trump had a 49% approval rating in my state on election day. My opponent won with 49%, and the president spent more time on the race for governor in the state of Florida than he did on any race in the country, including coming to my state twice in the last week of the race. So the theory that you can't be progressive and run is actually not true. And in Florida, we had the typical turnout in a midterm race for governor should have yielded about 6.1 million voters. In my race, we had 8.2 million voters in the race for governor, and we saw a spike in a number of different categories. If there were things I would change, one, you can't be a party organization who only activates in an election year. Mm-hmm. Voters actually don't operate that way. They live, 65. You got to show up in their neighborhoods and talk about their issues, not only when you're asking for a vote, but when you're there hopefully trying to solve problems in the meantime, in between time. As the brokest candidate in the primary, I didn't actually have money to communicate in a paid way around the state of Florida, which meant when I became the nominee on August 28th, I literally had to go from a staff of 7 full-time staff in a statewide race of 20 million people to a staff of over 400. And with no real groundwork done in anticipation or to help prepare me. I didn't absorb an infrastructure to help me to become the governor of the state of Florida, and in spite of, it was a 30,000 vote difference. Include on top of that 20,000 votes that were rejected over signature. So another almost 10,000 that didn't get counted because they were stuck in a post office in Broward County, a county that I carried 8 out of 10 votes that were cast. So we also got election reform work that we have to do in our state to make sure that elections are fair and free.
He's done the math, huh?
Yeah.
I've dreamt about all of this, right?
And I mean, obviously, Andrew's 150% right? Like, that's what we need to do. And I'll just add, a little bit to that and just say, enthusiasm matters. The candidate matters. So you cannot just dust off whatever mediocre white man, frankly, and call him middle of the road and think that all of a sudden everybody from the suburbs is going to show up and the inner city and all the rural people, and we're all going to sing Kumbaya. I really, really think that the last election cycle has shown us in Texas and Georgia and Florida that the candidate matters. And so, the other point that I'll say, so I would say that there has to be a candidate at the top of the ticket that is going to galvanize like young people Young people need to be excited about them. Diverse populations need to be excited about them. Suburban people need to be excited about them. Needs to be a lot of people who are really hyped up about that candidate. And the last thing I'll say, and Andrew speaks so eloquently to this as well, is the infrastructure matters as well. Stacey Abrams, for example, did the Lord's work, which was not glamorous, behind the scenes for many years, trying to turn Georgia at least purple, but blue. 6 years?
6 years.
Building out, like training people to work on campaigns, doing voter engagement efforts, trying to register more people, get more people engaged and active, talking to people about their issues. All that stuff is hard work, but it's what happens in the between time around voter engagement that connects people in the state and keeps that momentum going, where ultimately it builds, where people say, okay, well, now I'm really gonna come out in full force. So the infrastructure and the excitement are two things that we just have to continue to underscore. And I would hate if we ended up with like a vanilla wafer kind of candidate that is, and I don't mean that by race, I mean like someone who's just boring and plain, right? Like, because I think we would do ourselves a disservice totally across the board.
So yeah, this is important, and I'm speaking objectively here. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. The same way Republicans obviously cannot afford to dismiss every non-white voter, okay? By the way, I'm not white, in case anyone here is wondering, so I'm speaking as someone of color. I think it's dangerous for Democrats to dismiss every white voter.
I agree.
Number one, it's unhealthy for the country. I don't think we should be appealing to people exclusively on their race or their ethnicity. I don't like when people do that to me. I want to hear about your ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care
Let me
that
give
you,
another
I don't
shout
care
out to
that
Stacey
you like
Abrams.
that I'm brown.
She just wrote a
But
piece
more
about this.
importantly, electorally, if you need to win, you at least need to build a coalition. And in a state like Florida, white voters, as Andrew knows, are still by far the dominant voting group. So I think the same way it's extremely dangerous for Republicans, and Donald Trump is doing a great job of this, of dismissing non-white voters and sending them the message that they're not needed in the Republican coalition. It's equally dangerous for Democrats, for their own good. It's equally dangerous to say, well, we don't really care about white people and we don't even want a white candidate. I mean, I think you should want the best candidate, whether that candidate is white, black, Hispanic, or otherwise.
So can I just say, because I certainly don't connote moderate with white, right? So my comment was about whether you run as a moderate or closer to your values. And quite frankly, I think most of the people who were voting could not tell me hook, line, and sinker what my policy was as opposed to my opponent. They were really, at every case, when I talked about issues, I tried to connect it to a very personal experience or story. But by the way, of the electorate, white voters were 68 or so %. We still got closer than any other candidate, white, in my case, who were all my predecessors. I don't think you divide people based off of race or region. I went to all 67 counties and competed in the most conservative places as well as the most liberal places in the state, and we pulled support out of there, including turning Jacksonville, Florida, Duval County, which is historically been known as a county you cannot win the state of Florida as a Republican without. They proved us wrong because I moved it into the Democratic column for the first time in over 3 decades. Very white, very rural in many ways, but it was possible. So I agree. I think you got to compete everywhere, and you can't break people off into just demographic groups. They're Floridians, at least in my case, and you got to go and you got to make the best pitch, the best sell you possibly can. But I don't think you have to do that by betraying who you are, what your values are, and quite frankly, the agenda that you wish to move for the state. Many people didn't know what my opponent believed in. They knew he was baby Trump, and in a state where Trump again had 49% support, he won with 49%.
Well,
Mark, may I make one observation as the non-politician? My experience with politicians that I've said over the last 2 days is I prosecuted most of them. Yeah.
No one on this stage, however.
Not yet, no.
Lord have mercy.
So honesty, and integrity and empathy are what candidates need to exude, I think, more than anything else to capture people's hearts and minds. But we started with the State of the Union, and I just wanted to make one observation. There was an observation on the top that we didn't really speak much of foreign policy. But what strikes me as so interesting on this spring day in February in Boston, on the heels of Camp Fire and polar vortex, that the word environment did not come up once, which is, I think, as compelling a political issue for whoever is going to run as a Democrat or a Republican as exists today. And it just struck me, we used to say in trials, whether I was a prosecutor or a defense attorney, it didn't matter, we used to say, listen to what they're not saying. And what nobody said was environmental policy should be front and center for our party because we are at a crossroads. And it just struck me as, this is why I'm only a legal analyst. I probably am missing something profound here.
No. You're here. Well, it's the good news is Congressman Curbelo's study group will focus on climate change as well as immigration issues.
On climate change.
But your point is interesting. Well, you can readily see why we're so excited with this group of fellows. They are leading 7 study groups. We encourage you to look at that. We're particularly grateful that Dan Baltz returns as our senior fellow this year. Dan, we're glad you're here. And so we are glad to have former fellow Scott Jennings back. He is going to be leading our campaigns and advocacy work. I don't know if Scott's in the house, but many of you recall Scott's good work. So lots of interesting things at the Institute of Politics. We invite you to the Winter Garden here at the Wexner Building for an open house, thanks to our great student leadership. We thank all of our fellows for a really interesting forum tonight. You definitely want to go to their study groups during the course of the week, and thank you all for coming. Kate, EJ, thanks so much.